Right. Is it still recording? That's what we tend to call that, just a week. 7 days. That's the collective term is a week. Dementia levels of confusion here about where we've been.
And I got the quiet chair now, even though it's horribly uncomfortable.
All right. Let's crack on then, shall we?
Let's go.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast, as you probably guessed now from my dulcet tones. This is episode 31. We're kind of nearing the end, I suppose, of what's been a pretty epic journey now. It's hard to believe that we started this right back in March, I think. So, James, you've been clearly reminiscing, you said, by text already, even though we're not finished.
Well, I just ran out of other podcasts to listen to, so I decided, well, what the heck, I'd go back and check out episode 1. And, I got to say, we sounded pretty good. No false modesty here.
So it bears re-listening, would you say?
100%. And I mean, if you've come in this far and looks like we're going to be locked down a couple more months in various places around the world, including beautiful Ireland, where you are, after having looked through the photos and followed us this far, you may want to go back and you'll hear it in a different way and, put on some records and you can recreate a jazz Keeseton in your own house. I know that anybody listening to this has got records, so that's not a problem. They can do that.
It's getting to that stage where we're going to have to start recreating our own things anyway, so it might be perfect timing. You mentioned the lockdown there. This week, Ireland as a whole country, or certainly the Republic of Ireland's gone into the level 5 lockdown, which is probably the strictest version. There are a few changes from the original one for sure. And I know, James, that we often, we very much stay away from politics and current affairs on this podcast. That's not what it's about. And of course, it can be quite divisive and so on. But there is one thing I think it would really be remiss of me not to raise on this particular podcast and on this particular week. So you may or may not have heard from the news, but of course, this week marked the release of what's known as Guinness 0.0. That's all the taste of Guinness with none of the alcohol. And I just thought I really need to get your take on that.
Wow, you just sprung that on me as I've just opened a absolutely gorgeous 6% milk stout from the Left Hand Brewing Company. So all I can say is Guinness, how could you? I feel betrayed. I may never go back because this Left Hand Brewing Company milk stout is absolutely wonderful. But that should be classified as a crime against humanity, no doubt.
Well, if you are listening in Ireland and you happen to work for Guinness or you work for Diageo and you want to turn things around, you've lost one of your most loyal customers there potentially. What better time to jump on the sponsorship train and get the podcast out to a wider audience? So we'll just leave that hanging in the air there, James.
There's been a lot of Guinness talk on the show recently. Remember, we talked about Birdland in Kitasenju last week, being the only jazz spot that I found in Japan that serves Guinness on tap. So, pretty good timing for that. I don't think he's going to switch over to the 0.0 though.
Well, no, and it's currently only available apparently in Britain and Ireland, so you'll have a little bit longer to wait, but perhaps we can do a video version of the podcast and we can have one of your famous tasting tests live on camera just to see. Nothing that can't be done with a couple of cans of Guinness and a blindfold. So, James, this week we're calling the episode Sono, which for those of you familiar with the Japanese language will know is kind of a bit of a catch-all phrase, but essentially it means the others or in addition to or the rest or whatever it might be. And I suppose the reason that we called it that is just there are a few other joints that we haven't covered explicitly on the podcast, and we thought it would just be kind of a shame not to at least give them a nod. So the first place we'd chosen is rather confusingly written in English as Bunca, and you could also potentially pronounce it that way in Japanese, but we think it's also meant to be pronounced Banka. And when we've seen it written in katakana, which you probably know is one of the loan alphabets of Japanese, for foreign words in particular, it is definitely written as Banka. We also then discovered, as we were sort of fumbling our way through, which we've chosen to edit out, that there's actually two places with the same name. And not only do they have the same name, but they're also basically chains of each other. So they're completely related, probably opened and run by the same people that started the first one. They happen to be in two different areas. We did visit them both together, and we spent about the last 10 minutes trying to figure out where each of them were and which one was which. But you'll be happy to know that if you go to the TokyoJazzJoints.com website and you go on to either Tokyo A to H for the joints or Regions A to H, you'll find the two places that we're talking about. And instead of talking about one and discovering that there was another one, we're going to just cover both of them today at the same time, which seems a lot more logical now that we've actually figured out what the hell we're doing. So you're lucky that you've missed the last 20 minutes of that. That was just a little recap as to why I'm sort of giggling my way through this initial introduction as I question my own mental capacity. So the first place is Bunca or Banka or whatever the hell it's called. And there are two. One is in a place called Hoya, which we're led to believe is in the west of Tokyo. And then there's another place called called Bunka in a place called Shiki, which is in Saitama, one of the prefectures which borders Tokyo. James, is that a fair summation of where we're at?
Yeah, you were being overly generous at first with the 10 minutes. I'm glad you corrected it to the 20, which is more like 25. But yeah, a good lesson to all you would-be podcasters out there. That 20 minutes you put aside for preparation, well, maybe make it 45 instead, because sometimes slip-ups happen, but thankfully we have a great audio guy who we've thanked many times, and he will assist us with editing the program into the sleek, lean, and informative show that you are used to.
Yes.
We are starting, please go to the Tokyo Jazz Joints webpage, go to Regions A to H, and open up Bunka Shiki. Shiki is a town in Saitama Prefecture. I would say it's a northwest of central Tokyo, maybe a good 20, 30 kilometers northwest in the suburbs. Satellite cities is more like it. And this place, it kind of sad to talk about today because I only just discovered that it closed a couple of months ago. I was able to find online that it did not close due to anything having to do with the COVID-19 pandemic or, shops being shut down. Most of these shops have not been shut down in Japan, even when the lockdown was at its height earlier in the year. So I'm still trying to get some information from people in the know about why it did close. But as you can see, it was a beautiful spot with a lot of records. I mean, they had a lot of records right when you come in. In your second photo, Philip, you can see the two floor-to-ceiling racks on either side with the space sort of coming in between it. So you walk through there to get to your table, and you can just look at all of those beautiful, beautiful records that they have lined up. And what's interesting, the place looks pretty old, right? It has kind of an old feel about it, the furniture, the plants and stuff. But actually, it had only been at this place in Shiki for about 20 years. It used to be a shop in the center of Tokyo in an area called Nihonbashi. If you're familiar with Tokyo, you'll know Nihonbashi because that was the old sort of center point of old Edo hundreds of years ago.
I think it's still where they measure distances, isn't it? So if you're driving around Japan and it says Tokyo, right, 23 kilometers, you know that they're talking about specifically that point in Tokyo as well. Yeah, so really central place.
Yeah. And obviously, by the 1980s, the rent there would have been outrageous. And also the area would have been redeveloped with a lot of new buildings. So they moved from there all the way to Saitama, which is where I believe the owner's family came from. So they moved a bit closer to home and opened this one in Shiki. And what's really interesting is, as we just made mention to, so we visited this Bunka. We also visited the other Bunka, which is in Hoya, which is way in the western suburbs of Tokyo, so a bit farther away. And I think we had commented at the time, like, oh, that's a coincidence that they both have the same name, but we didn't make the connection that they were actually sister shops. And now when I look back at the pictures, you can kind of see. Can you see the one thing that jumps out as being a clue, Philip? If you look at the pictures,
I mean, when you say kind of see, I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible that we never made the connection. I think this was the reason for my confusion. I'm not trying to backpedal now, and I've big upped my powers of observation throughout this podcast, but I knew at the time when I was editing these, I was like, they seem like similar places, and that's why I kind of changed the names on the website. But now when you look at them together, it's it's unbelievable that we didn't make the connection, because it is literally the same sign, except for one of them says Hoya and the other one doesn't. And I mean, even the detail of the little HMV dog on top of the piano. So I mean, you couldn't have more clues to tell you that they're sister places, but for whatever reason, we seem to miss it.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because the other clue I was looking at was the way that they labeled the records.
Yeah,
he had it done by record label, so you can see in one of your pictures it says Blue Note, and so it, both in the Bunca Shiki location and in the Hoya location, which seems to have even more records. I mean, these guys have got thousands of records
really,
there.
isn't it?
Yeah, and I've seen people write online about their collections. People who are sort of blogging about record culture in Japan. They've mentioned Bunca many times. So it's one of the more serious collections that you're going to find in any of the Kisatens. But
and also,
I thought it was.
I mean, also, you can see from the Bunca that the one that's closed, there's a gorgeous picture there of that. Well, I shouldn't say gorgeous picture. There's a picture of that gorgeous amplifier next to the speakers that you can see. But I think also what was interesting for me, and that's probably why I photographed it as well, is that they have so many records, there's no space for them anymore. So you can see on one of the images of the interior, they're actually stacked up on the bar stools as well. There's at least two big piles of records there, covered in a very Japanese fashion with this sort of cloth to keep the dust off. It just shows you how much stuff. I mean, it's literally bursting at the seams in terms of the amount of stuff that they have in there. It's incredible collection of memorabilia and records. It's just an astonishing place.
I'm really glad that we got to visit there, and it was only later on the way home that I had one of those real quite, dope moments, because when I first came to Japan in 1997, I lived only a couple stations from Shiki. And I actually used to drink sometimes at this station area in some identikit chain izakaya with friends, never knowing that just a 5-minute walk away was one of these little pockets of jazz heaven. And so all those nights that I could have just, instead of getting drunk with dumb colleagues, I could have been here. I couldn't believe it. But, I mean, at that time, there was just no promotion of it. People weren't even, the web was really just kicking in, and I didn't speak the language. So, there would have been no way to find that out. But yeah, it was a real zannen moment, as they say here. But anyway, Bunca Shiki, a beautiful place. And what's funny is, right, if you go now over to the Tokyo A to H page and you look at Bunca Hoya, check out that wall of records in there. I mean, isn't that just beautiful?
Yeah.
Look at all over the floor as well. I mean, it's just fantastic.
It's just so beautiful. I mean, I think for me, the Bunca Hoya in particular, from outside, you could be mistaken for thinking it's a high-end kaiseki ryori type place that you'd find in Kyoto or something, perhaps apart from the open exclamation mark sign. But it's just got that beautiful wooden paneling. It's got that really nice off-white plaster. It's got lots of plants and flowers outside. And then, of course, when you go inside, it's all very muted, all sort of different shades of brown. It's got this gorgeous logo, just Bunca or Banka coffee with jazz. And one of my favorite little things is just the head of the owner just popping out through that alcove. You can see him there back in the kitchen beavering away. And a couple of gorgeous places. I mean, fantastic. I mean, again, just shows you the sort of wealth of riches that we have when, one of these closes, but amazingly, there's still one of these other places in existence. And perhaps, all that collection from Shiki has moved over to Hoya. Who knows? It's probably worth going to check out.
I would think so, and I'm due for a visit to sort of that western part of Tokyo in a couple weeks. So I will do my best to get by there. Hoya is a bit far away. You can see from the picture the guy with his hose watering the trees and bushes. I mean, this is a pretty out there residential place far away. But this Bunca is the kind of place you would sit with your coffee. Definitely. Not talking, the music, you're right next to the speakers. I mean, look at that. You're literally just like a meter away from the speakers there.
I don't know whether they'd even put the stuff if it came over there, but I suppose it's more spacious than some of the places we've been for sure. So, rip a couple of tables out there, get those shelves up to the roof, and you might just squeeze in that additional record collection. But you can see even from the one in Hoya that, it's already overflowing down at the bottom. There's
Oh, yeah. He's got his great Art
records on the
Pepper
floor.
record down there, and he's got all the Impulse records up on the top right. I mean, oh, gosh. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been able to spend some quality time in a Key 10 by myself. I'm going to have to try and sneak out this weekend at some point because just looking at pictures, glorious. So
Well,
that's the big Bunca mystery solved.
Apparently
well
so.
done.
Apparently so, yeah. So let's move on. We're going to move on to a couple of places, and we'll not spend too long on them because I know you'll probably get too jealous if I do. But these are actually a couple of places. I mean, obviously, we went to a lot of these places together. As I've said before, we spent huge amounts of time and money just schlepping all around the country to go to different places. And what I suppose I started to do in later years was, I mean later years in Japan, not my later years, although I suppose it's maybe much of the same thing, was, when I was in other places in the country, whether that was for work or, just holiday with my wife or whatever it might be, trying to sneak in a couple of places. And I suppose in some ways it's nice because it gave you that kind of focus when you would go somewhere else, to check out a couple of places to see what was available. And also, of course, there are a lot of places in any country that you live in that you are quite aware it might be the only time that you end up getting there, So one of these places was on a road trip, actually. I took the car and we drove up to Kanazawa. We've mentioned Kanazawa a couple of times, on the other side of Japan, on that coast that faces out towards China. And until quite recently, of course, it did very much feel maybe like quite a different place. It wasn't connected so well to Tokyo in terms of, the bullet trains and the things that we maybe necessarily expect. And on the way up there, I happened on this place called Jazz Cafe Hayashi, which, as you can see from the photographs, if you go to them on the website, is once again, as we've said many times, is based out of his house. It's very clearly a house that's been built to encompass not only his obsession and his passion, but also himself and his wife. And that's his car parked outside the place. And when we got there that day, again, it was quite early in the morning, no one there at all. And had a really fantastic experience going in there. He himself was an interesting guy. He'd clearly retired, as we've said, many of these guys had done. He'd clearly retired and, set up this place to kind of keep himself busy. And he himself was actually a bass player. And so you can see in the last photograph, he insisted on coming and showing us out as we were leaving, and the way that he did that was just incredibly charming. He got the double bass, he played us a little tune as we headed out through the exit and into the car, and then he stood there and waved us off. And I mean, it was just, I suppose, adorable. I mean, it was just the nicest thing. And you can see as well, it's such an odd photograph because he's obviously there. You can see the movement in the hand as he's playing, and then on top,
there's a lot going on in this picture that I wanted to ask you about, because is that a bicycle helmet on top of the lamp?
I actually myself had not just noticed that until now, but there's a bicycle helmet balanced on that really beautiful lamp, which in itself is kind of a little bit bizarre. But also you can see there's a photograph of the Chick Corea signature on one of these Japanese style boards that we've mentioned before, that you often see up in different bars and cafes and ramen places. And you'll see as well that Chick's also signed that picture. Well, that picture is one that was drawn by the owner. So this was another thing that he did. He took these jazz musicians.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And he put these photographs, he took these photographs and he turned them into kind of illustrations. You can also see there's another one there in front of the drum kit, which is also signed with the speaker system in the background. And then, of course, after all that, you get to the speaker system, which, again, in itself is just astonishing. I mean, he's got this beautiful old Japanese style wooden cabinet, and tucked into it, the amplifiers, and then these just astonishing speakers, and then a drum kit off to the left. So it's a fully functional live space if you want to have a gig in there. And you can see even from the sort of interior shot with the the bar stools lined up. Like, it's a very big space. There's a couple of little break-off rooms, one of which I photographed there with sort of a collection of CDs and records. And again, this is this guy's living here. He's living upstairs. He comes down every morning, opens up, he serves coffee to locals, maybe has some gigs now and again. You can crank the music like so loud. You can see it's a detached house, which again is not often the most common thing in Japan. And then you've got this gorgeous piece of calligraphy that he's also done, just hanging up on the wall as well. So it's just an astonishing place. And again, just tucked away in a regional city.
When I saw these pictures, I was so so jealous. Yeah, you're completely right. And Matsumoto is an interesting town. It's a castle town. But as you can see from the second picture that you have of the road where it's on, and I guess we should mention to our non-Japanese listeners, 884, Cafe 884, one way that you can pronounce that in Japanese is Hayashi. Because numbers can be pronounced in different ways. So ha and ya can both be for number 8, and shi can be number 4. So 884 would be Hayashi. But as you can see, the road here, this is clearly like in a sort of an outskirts neighborhood in Matsumoto. And on the right side, what looks like some public housing. There's not even a sidewalk. So people are going to be driving. This is definitely not in Tokyo. But his house there, obviously with the space, he can crank the music up. I love the fact that the downstairs where he has the cafes looks to be about 3 to 4 times bigger in floor space than his living space at the top.
He's got his priorities
which looks like
right.
It's just one room. He probably just goes up there to sleep and that's it. But yeah, as we've said so many times, right? The kind of place that you find in the most unexpected locations. And, the whole arrangement of this place, the shape of it, where he has the speakers, where the counter is, really, really intrigued me. And that base picture is definitely one of my favorites of the whole project, because it's just something about the expression on his face. It's just really lovely.
Yeah, it was a real find. And, I've mentioned before, we've talked a few times, I've brought Sarah with me to some of these places. I think she was definitely more tolerant of it when we started going out, and less so the longer we spent together. So this was one of those occasions where I was in charge because I was driving, and she came with me very patiently and tolerantly to these places. And of course, this being a really good one where it's not dark, it's not smoky. And, whether you're into jazz or whatever else it might be, there's a fantastic experience to come and see one of these places and meet these. And these people are real characters. This guy is a real character. Who plays customers? I mean, I'm sure he doesn't do it for everyone necessarily, but who plays customers out to the car on a double bass? I mean, come on. It's just, I have a couple of the postcards that he puts together, the illustrations that he does. So I'll stick those on the social media feed this week when the episode goes out as well. Staying in Matsumoto, which, as you mentioned, was a castle town, it has a very famous castle, and actually a lot of the town, the old original town, is still quite intact, and it has it's very popular with tourists, isn't it? Because it really has some really nice old streets to walk around. You kind of get that sense of maybe what Japan used to be like pre-war.
And it's very, very popular even with Japanese tourists for that reason, who are looking to get outside of the sort of concrete jungle and experience something that maybe they've only heard about from their grandparents or seen in the movies. So it's a very popular destination, and it's sort of a gateway into the mountainous region of Nagano, where you can go skiing, to the hot springs. So definitely a livelier place than some of the other regional towns that we've mentioned. I have many questions about Ionta, because I had heard of this place. It's interesting because people had told me about Eonta. They had not mentioned Hayashi because I think that's much less well known. But Eonta, having opened since 1974, you can see that on the front sign. And what a great awning that is! Isn't that lovely? That long vertical black one where it's written in katakana, and then on the right, coffee and jazz. That's I like a good sign in front of a shop, and one definitely stuck out to me. But it's interesting. The space it doesn't seem to be very large inside. I couldn't even get a really good feel for how you would sit there, without being overwhelmed by the sound of the speakers, because they're literally right on top of you.
Well, you probably don't. I mean, I think that's probably the point, isn't it? I mean, you can see it's very narrow from the outside. So we kind of made our way around to Aonta actually from Hayashi, and I think it wasn't open at that point. So we went and did some tourist stuff. Yeah, it's a very narrow space, as you correctly say. It almost looks to me like that awning in particular looks like one of those emergency chutes that you have in Japan, to get out of a building in the case of an earthquake or a fire, but which are terrifying, by the way, if you ever have to do one. But it always sticks in my mind because it was 1974, which is the same year I was born, so I always remember that sticking with me. And then, of course, it has this beautiful application of the French language where it just says jazz et booze, which I'm led to believe by French listeners means and. So jazz and booze.
Wow, you can tell that you're an educator, Philip. I would never have figured that one out. Wow, that's impressive, man. Yeah.
So laying out their stall nice and early there, you get coffee and jazz on the side, you get jazz et booze as you enter. And then, of course, before you even get into the place, you have this incredible wall of plaster, which has just been autographed by all the musicians that have come and played there. And the one, of course, that stood out for me, and I was led to believe by the owner, it wasn't the only time that he was there, but you can see there, thank you, Bill Evans, 1978. And of course, Chick Corea there on the left in 1991. So once again, these guys were coming here after they'd played the big gigs that we've talked about, the big concert hall type tour gigs. They were heading off to these little jazz joints for drinks or to jam afterwards. And just right there on the wall as you go up the stairs, all these famous musicians signed.
Listen, Philip, when I saw the pictures, okay, I spent an unhealthy amount of time looking at these signature photos, okay, of the wall, all right?
Yep.
First because I thought it was somehow the bathroom, but I couldn't quite tell from the angle you took, because you usually see that in a lot of places where people write on the walls of the bathroom. But then I went down a rabbit hole thinking surely all these people didn't make it to Aonta in Matsumoto. This is just fans writing it, Japanese people writing it. And then I was like, wait a second, that's these signatures definitely are going to be real. And look at the names on there. Paul Moshan, Bill Evans, Chick Corea, even Paco de Lucia. Am I right in reading that, or is it something else?
And there's also, is that Takeo Moriyama? I've just noticed as well up at the top.
Incredible. So, obviously, the owner here is, or his place is sort of, jazz central for the whole city of Matsumoto, where, as you said, people would come up and play the gigs in the, the community hall or one of the bigger clubs, and then come here to hang out, as small as it might be. What an unbelievable entryway. Never seen anything like it. That kind of stuff is almost 99% of the time it's in the bathroom. We've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
But here it's actually in the steps leading up to it. Just amazing.
It's an old school place too. You can see from the interior, it's those places that I really love. It's got the old wood. It's got that era feel. It hasn't really changed in 30, 40 years. Obviously, huge record collection. And it's got the speaker system down at the end again, very altar-like with the flower arrangement in the middle. You can see the classic Japanese kerosene heater as well there for the winter months, because it gets pretty cold up there. And then one of my favorite photos, I think, is this photo and of Miles tucked in the corner of that window with this sort of indigo colored vase. I really love this photograph, personally speaking. And it was just a gorgeous place. We sat there for a couple of hours. We talked to the owner and his wife. They were very friendly, sort of, once they get over the initial bafflement of like, why are you here? And if you're on a romantic getaway, why are you coming here? But, very hospitable, very kind. And we did a switch of business cards and so on and so forth. And there's something about Aonta, I don't know what it is, it just always sticks in my head as one of those places that I'm glad I got to. And obviously I know that you'll have the opportunity when you make it up to Matsumoto at some point to go there too. But it's definitely unmissable if you're living in Japan and you're able to get to that region, or you're up there on a holiday, or for whatever reason, make sure you check it out. It opens later in the day. I think it's much more of an evening place, but definitely put it on the itinerary.
Oh, for sure. Now, so on that same trip, you were driving, I believe, and you were making your way up to Kanazawa, which is on the west coast of Japan. facing Korea and China. Kanazawa is a lovely town, a little bit similar to Matsumoto. It's an old castle town, but actually even more well preserved. The old center of Kanazawa still is quite quite authentic. And the next place, and I think you captured it well. If you're looking on the site, it's called York.
Yep.
If you look in the regions part, York opened in 1968. And there's a lot of things that stuck out about York. And I'm interested to hear your story. I did go there several years ago, quite a few years ago, actually. But unfortunately could not get time to speak with the owner because it was full when I went in, which was, I'm always happy to see that, although a little disappointed because I don't get my chatting time, but I'd like to see that they're doing good business. But also I had maybe 40 minutes before I had to race back to the station to get on the Shinkansen. So it was a really short visit, which I regretted. But it's a beautiful, beautiful little spot. It's starting with the amazing sign out front of what clearly to me is a silhouette of Thelonious Monk.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Kanazawa has a really interesting feel. There's a lot of influences in it, and it feels quite old in some ways. And there's a really unique atmosphere about it. I don't know what it is. Perhaps coming from Tokyo, a lot of things feel the same. There's a lot of kind of you've referenced the kind of cookie cutter architecture of Tokyo and parts of it. There's something about Kanazawa that retains this feel of. It's not quite as modern as other places in Japan, and that may change, of course, with tourism and so on. But this sign, I mean, you can see it's a fairly standard sort of street cafes. It's got the usual neon signs, and then suddenly there's just this blue and pink silhouette of Thelonious Monk, and it really stands out on the street. And then, of course, when you go into this, what you can see is a fairly rickety and old-looking building. There's just this old wooden beamed sort of house. It doesn't really look particularly Japanese. It's got old bits and pieces of furniture, and they've really done nothing to it since it opened. I mean, it opened in 1968, I think the owner said, and you can see particularly from the Benny Golson album that they were playing that's tucked down at the end of the counter. Just look at the counter. The counter is clean, but it's never been redone. It's never been sanded or polished or anything like that. They've just let it go.
It's definitely 50 years of drinks, of cigarettes, and of customers. I mean, no change at all. And it's amazing because, like we talked about when we see some of these regional joints that have a lot of space, like we just talked about, like Hayashi, and then some of the other places when we went up north. Kanazawa is a mid-sized city. I wouldn't say it's a large city, and it is a little more lively than some places in the regions of Japan, but still a very, very, very small building. I mean, that kind of struck me too when I walked in. I thought that there was going to be something behind, like you'd walk in, there was the counter, and then maybe a room behind it with more tables, But no, there was nothing. That was it.
Tiny and also quite hard to photograph in because it's so dark. I love the menu. It's just you've got cheese there, pasta, salami, you got some olives, pickles, chocolate, tomatoes, umeboshi, apples. I mean, there's no messing around, is there? There's just, this is what we've got. Don't be looking for prices.
I'm not sure why did apples come up there? I have no idea.
It looks like it's replaced something else. So I don't know what was off the menu there.
And I'm like, how many people come to be like, yeah, can I get an order of pickles and an order of tomatoes? And, let me get my bottle of wild turkey that's down there that I left from last time. It's the bottle keep. Those bottle keeps just are
incredible,
sweet, though.
Right?
I mean, Glenlivet and Bowmore. I love myself some good scotch. And obviously, as we've mentioned before, but if some of our listeners have still not gotten it yet, the bottle keep system, I think we've explained it once or twice, but you can see people have written their names on there. So there's how many? There's 4 bottles in each row on that shelf, right? So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. We're looking at 50 plus bottles. These are regular customers who have purchased a bottle of scotch or bourbon, drank whatever they drank the night, wrote their name on it, popped it on the shelf. The next time they come back, all they need to do is pay for the ice and some soda water. Bottles there for years. I mean, years. And the owners will not take them away. They're just covered in dust. It's all faded. And somebody might come back 5-6 years later and be like, hey, is my bottle still here? Yeah, I got it for you, sure. Only in Japan.
Yeah, you can see as well down below the bottles, there's a just trumpet as well, just casually tucked in there at the bottom. It has everything. It's just an incredible place. I suspect it's one of those places that would definitely not survive a serious earthquake, and probably once the owners are done with it, it'll go. Okay, well, I think that's a good place to leave it for this week, James. What we're going to do next week is finish off our series in Kansai. We're going to start in Kyoto, make our way up to Kobe, take a little detour to the once lovely seaside town of Atami, and then we're going to jump on the train up to Tokyo. And of course, from Tokyo, then we're going to start this trip that we've mentioned previously, where I went back to Japan a couple of years ago, and we spent 7 full days together without, incredibly, killing each other, and went to some unbelievable places along the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to take you through that journey that we experienced it chronologically, and obviously not just the jazz joint related adventures, but the other scrapes and incidents that we got ourselves into along the way. So I'm really looking forward to revisiting that trip. I think it's going to be a fantastic journey, although I probably in the current circumstances and the inability to get back to Japan, it'll probably make me a little bit sad too, but it'll be fun to relive it and obviously share that fab trip with other people. Thanks for spending this time with me, James, in my lonely level 5 lockdown over here in Dublin. It's always good to chat to you every week, and I'll see you next week. Thanks as always to Brian, of course, for his help with the audio, and thanks again to Louie Lastic for our intro and outro music. James, until next week, I'll see you. Take it easy.
Ciao.